Finally, I do want to wrap. One more team, one more game, and this is going to be listen, I think this is an interesting game that is absolutely worth discussing. It is the Southwest Classic at Jerry World. That's Texas A&M. We started the show with Kentucky smacking Florida. Well, Texas A&M smacked Arkansas. Final score 34-22 in this one, as Texas A&M holds Arkansas to 174 yards of total offense. And don't look now, but all those young Texas A&M guys, part of that elite recruiting class, are starting to figure it out. Now, before we get into it, I know we have a lot of Arkansas fans that listen to this show, that watch on YouTube. I know what you're going to say, Torres, we stink. Don't give Texas A&M a single ounce of credit. What I would say is, I get it. I get that you're frustrated about the situation with your program. I think, to me, it's kind of shocking that Sam Pittman, an offensive line coach, the first 3 years of his regime, it was all about physicality and toughness along the line of scrimmage. They can't move anybody along the line of scrimmage. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. I don't understand why this team is struggling on the offensive line the way that they are. Fans are starting to get restless. This is maybe a midweek topic. It'll certainly be a topic if you lose to Ole Miss next week, is that, if Arkansas loses back-to-back, I think there's going to start to be some momentum that maybe Sam Pittman's not really the guy. Maybe there's someone else out there. Is that process starting? I'm starting to hear behind the scenes it may already be starting. Sam Pittman needs a win. But to me, I understand that an Arkansas fan is going to sit there and say, oh, we just stink. Don't give A&M any credit. I actually think it's the exact opposite. I actually think it's exactly what I said just a moment ago. And that is that I believe that those young players at A&M are really starting to get confidence, and they're really, frankly, starting to live up to their reputation. And to tell the whole A&M story, and to be clear, a lot of schedule ahead, and we'll get to that in a minute. But to be clear, like with A&M, any discussion about this season really goes back to last year. Because as bad as it was last year, I keep going back to what we talked about the entire time. Finished 5-7, but of those 7 losses, 5 were by a touchdown or less, okay? You lose on the final play of the game to Alabama. You lose to South Carolina. I've said it a million times, in a game where you literally outscored South Carolina after the first play of the game. South Carolina returns the opening kick for a touchdown. You outscore them from there. It was that kind of season for A&M last year. But what not enough people talk about, all anybody talked about, fire Jimbo Fisher. What's the buyout? What's this? What's that? What nobody talked about was there were so many injuries on that team last year. There were a lot of issues, to be clear. There were chemistry issues. Jimbo Fisher probably shouldn't have been calling plays and trying to do everything else, but there were also a million injuries. And what ended up happening was all of those young guys that were true freshmen that probably shouldn't have been playing, that should have been depth pieces, they got thrown into the fire, and they were really, really, really inexperienced, and they had to learn on the fly. And now what you're seeing is a team with young guys that seemingly is getting more confidence every week. And I know they lost to Miami, but since then, destroyed Monroe, destroyed Auburn, destroyed Arkansas, okay? And when I look at Saturday specifically, look at who those contributors were. Leading rusher, Le'Veon Moss, part of that 2022 recruiting class. Evan Stewart, touchdown catch, leaves the game with injury. Hopefully he's fine, but he was a key part of that class. On the defense, Bryce Anderson, second leading tackler, part of that class. Walter Nolan was one of maybe the number one player in the entire 2022 recruiting class outside of Travis Hunter. He was all over the field yesterday. He was unblockable. I'm just trying to go off the top of my head, guys that stood out from that game. LT Overton played really well. You look at some of these other guys that were dominant in that game. Jared Kerr was one of the lower rated recruits in that class. He was awesome. Who's the guy that I'm missing? I'm blanking on one guy here off the top of my head. Who was the guy that stood out? He did something. Jacoby Matthews is all over the field constantly as a defensive back. So I'm rambling. I don't want to overdo this, but I think the point remains. This is a team that, again, is young, but is getting talent. And I think what's obvious watching them, they are getting more and more confidence every single week as this thing goes on. And what I would be worried about if I was the rest of the SEC, first of all, dominant up front in the trenches. dominant up front in the trenches, 15 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in this game. Now, not all of them were from that 2022 recruiting class, but dominant in the trenches and gaining confidence every week. The worst thing you want if you're an opponent is a team that is not only talented, but getting confidence. I remember Louis Riddick talked about this with Texas A&M in their opener against New Mexico. He said these guys they've always been good, but they're playing so much faster, so much more confident. We're going to find out this weekend against Alabama. Texas A&M hosts Alabama this coming weekend. But I'm here to tell you, man, I think this team is starting to figure it out. They take care of Alabama. Guess who has the inside track to Atlanta in the SEC championship? Not saying they beat Bama, not saying it's happening. But you look at how they match up against Bama at home. The veteran quarterback defensive front is filthy. I think A&M's. I won't give away my week 6 predictions here on Monday, but you talk about a team that I think can absolutely beat Alabama next week. It's the Texas A&M Aggies. Arkansas